I used to believe the woods respected me. It was a comforting thought back then, standing tall beneath the pines of Colorado's Front Range, the wind brushing my uniform as if the forest itself approved of my presence. My name, well, let's just say I've been a ranger long enough that the trees know it better than the agency does. I'm 34 now, with over a decade patrolling the high trails of the Arapaho and Roosevelt National Forests. When I first started, I thought courage was simply walking into darkness with a flashlight and a badge. I thought the worst things out here were bears poking through people's coolers and campers getting lost on poorly marked trails. I didn't know then what people truly feared in the deep woods. I didn't know that fear could take shape, walk on two legs, and exhale like a wounded animal hiding behind the timberline. There's a saying locals tell newcomers around here: the pines remember the old stories. They mean it as a joke. I didn't. Where I work, the forest rises like jagged green walls on every horizon. The days can be so bright they make the world look innocent, untouched. But when the sun goes down, the shadows stretch and every tree seems to lean in a little, listening. Up here, the nights are long and the cold has teeth. The caves scattered through the foothills are older than any trail map or ranger cabin. Some people say those caves go farther than we think, deep beneath the mountain, deep beneath what we can explain. There's one cave the locals won't even name. They just call it the one you don't go back into. I'd heard those stories when I signed up for search and rescue rotations. Laughable, I thought. The mountains don't hide monsters, they just hide the unprepared. That's what I told myself for years, and then the disappearances started stacking up again. It was the winter after my 9th year on the job. A cold snap froze the river early, locking the valley in silence. There was something different about that season. Nights without stars, as though the sky didn't want to watch what was happening below. The first call came in late December. A hiker named Westbrook had failed to show up at home. His car was found at the trailhead near Storm Mountain. No sign of him on the icy path, no footprints beyond a certain point, and no scent for dogs to track. A clean erasure, like someone took a broom to the snow. We combed those canyons for days. Nothing. On the 4th night, I was the one who stayed late, walking alone beneath brittle moonlight. The wind was barely there, just a cold breath gliding through the pines. My boots crunched over old snow, steady, methodical. My radio hissed quietly with static, random, unpredictable. I remember feeling watched, though everything around me stood still. Then a sound. A voice? No, not words. More like a strained exhale from behind a tree line a few yards ahead, a slow, crouched kind of breathing. I flashed my light toward the noise. Nothing moved. But the feeling didn't go away. I stood there for too long, staring into blackness between trunks that seemed too close together, as if the woods grew thicker where the light didn't go. My own breath suddenly sounded too loud, rattling in my throat. I tried to rationalize it. Elk. Maybe a mountain lion. But I've heard mountain lions my whole life. This breathing was heavier, deeper, like something large was trying to hide the sound and failing. I radioed into the command post, just a small status update, pretending I wasn't shaken. "Area secure," I said, but my voice cracked at the end. I'd never felt fear like that before, fear that didn't come from what I sensed, but from not knowing what I sensed. That missing hiker? We never found him. Winter buried every answer. It was the second disappearance that took a piece of me. 2 weeks later, in January, a pair of campers vanished. They'd set up too deep for winter, in my opinion. When we located their camp, their tent was torn open from the outside. Their gear was scattered, not stolen. No animal tracks in the snow. No struggle. Just a thin mist still clinging to the air, as if the cold hadn't quite settled yet. And there on the fabric of the tent, raked through the nylon like someone's impatience, 4 deep grooves, too wide for a bear, too long for any claw I'd ever seen. That night, back at my ranger station, I pulled the evidence bag from the front seat of my truck where I'd tossed it. I wanted to examine the sample again, to convince myself it was just torn fabric. My hand trembled a little when I held it up to the lamp. The edges weren't frayed. They were polished, like something hard, something sharp, had sliced through it effortlessly. I didn't sleep after that. The forest outside my cabin started to feel alive in a way I didn't want to understand. The wind had a voice. The trees leaned closer to the windows. My dog, Quincy, would stand at the door and growl low into the night. I'd shine my flashlight into the yard and see nothing except swirling frost. I wasn't the only one uneasy. The locals who'd laughed at me before suddenly had stories they were willing to whisper. Old hunters mentioned strange silhouettes moving low between trees. Ranchers told me of livestock disappearing. No blood, no struggle, just gone when morning came. One man described hearing soft thuds outside his cabin, like footsteps too heavy to be human. When he'd yanked open his door, the forest looked normal again. Too normal. Silent in a way that sounded like deception. But they all came back to that same warning: stay away from the caves. The caves wake things up. I used to scoff at superstition. I trusted science, tracks, habitats, behavior patterns. Everything has a reason. Everything has a name. Until the night I heard my name spoken back to me. It was late February, still winter, though the forest had started shifting into something restless. Temperatures swung wildly, freezing at dusk, thawing at dawn. Trees cracked in the cold. Snow turned to slush that made the land feel soft, unstable. That night, I was alone again, heading back from checking old storm damage near an abandoned prospector trail. Quincy walked beside me, his paws leaving wet impressions that glistened pale blue under my headlamp. I stopped to adjust my pack straps. The woods were still. My exhale plumed white, curling upward like a ghost. Then behind me, a whisper. My name, soft, low, drawn out, as though someone had tried to speak without air in their lungs. I spun around, heart punching at my ribs. I blasted my light across the forest. 1,000 snow-tipped branches stared back. Quincy's growl rumbled through his chest, deeper than I'd ever heard from him. The whisper came again. This time, closer. The sound slid between the trees, not from one place but from everywhere, as though the forest itself had learned my name. All the logic that had defined my career slipped. This wasn't a cougar. This wasn't a trick of the wind. There was intention in that whisper. Recognition. Quincy barked once, sharp, panicked, and a shape moved just barely behind a stand of clustered pines. Not tall, but bulky, wide, like a massive shoulder pulling back into the dark. I should have reported it immediately, but some part of me didn't want anyone else to know what I'd heard, because saying it aloud would make it real. It would mean admitting the forest had changed. Or perhaps it had always been this way, and I had finally stopped pretending I was safe within it. I quickened my pace back to the truck. Never ran. Running triggers the chase instinct. Every ranger knows that. But I walked fast enough that my breathing hurt. Fast enough that Quincy kept looking over his shoulder. The forest watched us leave. That was the first night I felt hunted, and my instincts I had buried under training and protocol, kept telling me something horrifying. Whatever had learned my name was not done with me yet. For a few weeks, I tried to convince myself that fear had gotten the better of me. 9 years in the field, and I'd never let the dark play tricks on my mind. So I did what I always did when nature tried to intimidate me. I doubled down on patrols. I spent more time alone in remote sections of the mountains, forcing myself to treat that night like a fluke, a stress-induced hallucination, as if sanity were something you could flex like a muscle. But the forest remembered. The nights turned wrong before the days did. Sunsets began bleeding out faster, and snow that should have cracked underfoot began muffling footsteps instead, like the ground wanted to hide movement. Quincy no longer slept by the stove. He waited inches from the door, staring into the gaps between boards as though something peered back. Then came the call about the old hunter, Barnes. He was a stubborn man, 80 years old, with lungs that still lifted his chest like he'd been carved out of the same granite that framed the valley. Everyone knew him, mostly because he never stopped talking about how much he hated people. He lived off-grid, well beyond where rangers usually checked. When his niece requested a welfare visit, I figured he'd yell at me for trespassing and threaten to shoot my tires. I hiked up at dawn, frost snapping at twigs beneath my boots. The morning sun gave the canyon a soft glow, turning every pine needle into a glass shard. From a distance, I saw the wisps of white smoke first, too thin to be a proper fire, too thick to be fog. As I approached the cabin clearing, Quincy slowed, tail low, ears stiff. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, he just stopped walking, like something only dogs can sense had drawn a border he refused to cross. The cabin door hung half open. "Barnes?" I called, keeping my voice steady. No response. Inside, the air smelled wrong, not decay, not blood. More like wet stone, stale and ancient, as though a cave had swallowed this cabin overnight. His radio lay on the floor, cracked, batteries still inside. His rifle leaned in the corner, loaded. But the bed was empty. The whole room felt disturbed without showing signs of struggle. It was like he'd walked outside for wood and never returned. Except one thing stopped me from writing it off. The snow on the doorstep was smooth, not undisturbed, smoothed over. Perfectly. The way a blanket looks after someone pulls a hand across it, as if something didn't want footprints found. I stepped outside, scanning the tree line, and the fear I'd been avoiding became truth. Tracks, not boot prints. Not hooves. They were depressions, wide and deep, spaced too far apart for any human stride. 3 clear impressions leading from the cabin to the trees, and then gone. Not faded, not snowed over. Gone, like whatever made them lifted itself into the air. I followed instinct instead of reason that day. I stepped toward the line of pines, heart beating in a cold rhythm. Quincy stayed behind, whining softly. I crouched and touched the edge of one impression. The snow was compacted, not crushed to shards like a hoofprint would be, pressed down evenly by weight spread across something flat and broad, a shape too strange to dwell on. A shiver rolled through me, not from cold, but from a realization rising like an old secret. Something large had come to Barnes's door, and Barnes had gone willingly or silently. The search team combed the forest for 2 days. I kept quiet about the whispering voice, the breathing behind trees. I couldn't prove any of that, but the tracks, those they saw. And even the skeptic assigned to our unit kept looking over his shoulder like he expected something to be there. We found nothing of Barnes, not a shred of clothing, not a cell of blood. He'd vanished without noise. That night, I got home so exhausted I didn't bother locking the door behind me. Quincy curled at my feet, trembling in his sleep. I drifted into an uneasy half-dream. In it, I stood outside my cabin looking into the forest. Something crouched there, huge and hunched, arms as long as the shadows themselves. It breathed like mountains shifting, like stone grinding deep under ice. Then it raised its head, and I recognized a shape no man should have to understand. A face, but not formed for light. Eyes too deep set to catch reflection, a jaw too wide, cheeks sunken into cavernous hollows, hair thick and matted like pine roots buried in dirt. Didn't smile, it just stared, as if I were the one trespassing. I jolted awake, breath tearing through my chest. Quincy sat upright, hackles raised, facing the same dark window from my dream. The glass reflected only the dim interior, but the forest outside felt inches away, pressing in. I told myself dreams don't open doors, except in the morning. The door was open. Wide. No prints, no disturbance, just unlocked and ajar. Quincy growled at the threshold. I closed the door tight, double-bolted the lock, and sat on the floor watching sunlight creep across the boards. Fear no longer whispered. It stood in the room with me. Days passed. Every patrol, every footstep into the forest felt like I was walking into a story older than the language we use to talk about fear. I noticed more of the subtle signs, the broken branches that bent upward instead of down, the deeply rutted soil that didn't match tire marks or horse trails, the quiet. The quiet, most of all. Silence became a predator. One evening, a call crackled through the radio. Urgent. A boy, 12 years old, missing near a campground east of Long's Peak. I drove hard, tires spitting gravel. By the time I reached the site, his father was pacing circles into the snow, eyes wild with guilt and terror. The sky burned orange behind the Rockies. dusk closing in too fast. He just walked into the trees, the father stammered, said he saw someone waving at him. Couldn't have gone far. Someone waving. The words hit me low in the chest. We formed a perimeter. Flashlights cut through the dark like desperate lighthouses. I called the boy's name, voice echoing off stone and timber. Quincy strained at his leash, pulling us deeper into the woods. I wanted to believe he sensed a child, but his growl told a different story. We reached a creek bed, frozen over with a thin crust of ice. Quincy stopped dead, staring across it. I raised my light. For a split second, less than that, I saw a silhouette. Stocky, tall, shoulders sloped like a boulder had learned to stand upright, fur tangled in cold wind. It ducked behind a ridge of rock the moment my light touched it. I froze. Then, a new sound. A soft thwack, 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 almost rhythmic, like knuckles tapping stone. Not frantic, patient. Quincy's leash burned against my fist as he tried to pull away, whining, tail between his legs. I whispered his name, but my voice sounded wrong, shallow, like the air had been sucked from the world. My radio crackled. "We found the boy," a voice shouted. "He's okay." Relief, immediate, but contaminated. We hurried back to camp. The kid sat wrapped in a blanket, dazed but unharmed. His father sobbed into his shoulder. I crouched beside the boy. "Hey," I said gently, "who did you see waving?" He blinked up at me, pupils wide. His voice came out tiny, fragile. "The tall man," he whispered. "He wanted me to come play with him in the cave." My mouth dried. "What cave?" I asked. He lifted his hand and pointed behind me, toward the ridge, toward the trees that swallowed sound, toward somewhere I knew no mapped cave existed. But the forest has always known more than our maps. The father clutched his son tight as the boy continued, voice cracking like ice. "He told me I shouldn't be scared. He said he used to live here before the trees got tall. He said he remembers everything." My blood chilled. My heart felt like a stone sinking against bone. "Did he tell you his name?" I asked, barely breathing. The boy nodded once. "He said you already know it." I didn't go home that night. Sleep seemed like something soft people did when the world behaved. I sat inside my truck in the gravel lot of the ranger station, engine off, windows fogging, listening to the silence of the mountains press against me. Quincy paced circles on the back seat, claws clicking, breathing sharp. Every so often he would stop, nose pointed toward the window, trembling, not barking, just staring like he expected a shape to materialize out of the night. The boy's words looped in my head. "He said you already know it." I didn't know anything. That's what I told myself. But that was the dangerous kind of lie, the kind that tries to smother instincts honed by years of watching the woods for signs of trouble. I tried to rationalize it. Kids imagine things. Missing people disappear all the time without monsters being involved. But the truth crawled under those lies like roots under soil. Something knew me. And it had been getting closer. Before dawn broke, I stepped out of the truck, the cold biting hard through my coat. The air smelled metallic, like a storm brewing underground. My boots crushed frost as I walked toward the trail leading into the northern pines. I didn't radio in. I didn't leave a note. I just went, because fear had stopped being a warning and started being a summons. Quincy hesitated at the tree line. I knelt, gripping his fur. "You don't have to follow," I whispered, but he leaned into my leg and pressed forward, staying tight against me. It was a heavier burden than fear. We stepped into the woods together. The morning darkness felt unnatural, as if the sun struggled to rise here. Pines towered above us, ancient, rigid, their trunks marked by strange scars. Bark peeled in swirling patterns like something with claws had traced spirals just to see how deep the trees could bleed. And then we found it. Not a cave at first. A hollow in the earth, wide, black, yawning, open in a place where the ground should have been solid. Snow around its rim was melted, not by heat, but by something wetter, slicker. It looked like the earth had been sweating. Quincy growled, stepping back. A warning. I should have listened. I pointed my flashlight down. The beam barely penetrated the darkness. The cave sloped narrow at first. Stone walls scraped smooth. Too smooth. Not natural erosion. more like something dragged across them again and again, shaping the walls into its preference. The boy's voice replayed in my head. He wanted me to come play with him in the cave. The cave breathed. A low exhale rolled outward, chilling the air, brushing the exposed skin of my neck like fingertips. I jerked back, pulse hammering. The beam of the flashlight flickered and revealed something on the ground just inside. A bone. Long, splintered. Not deer. Not elk. Human femur proportions. I felt my legs weaken. I should have backed away, called this in, closed the entrance, but curiosity dug claws into me every bit as sharp as fear. I inched forward, leaning down just enough to see beyond the bone. Tracks. Wide. Heavy impressions pressed into the dirt floor of the cave. Three-toed. Sunk deep. And alongside them, a handprint. Huge. Imagine a shovel-shaped palm with fingers ending not in tips, but in thick, rounded nubs like blunt claws. That imprint alone froze every rational thought in my head. Something lived down there. Something that moved deeper than daylight ever dared to go. I stood up fast, breathing hard. Quincy barked, sharp and terrified. His leash pulled tight in my grip, and I stumbled back from the hole. Then I heard it. A distant thud. Slow. Purposeful. Like a footstep echoing up from the belly of the earth, followed by another and another, each one closer. My throat closed. I moved without thinking, turning, pulling Quincy as fast as my legs allowed. Branches snapped beneath us. The forest surged into motion, wind rising from nowhere, whistling through needles like 1,000 whispers. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what climbed toward the surface. We made it back to the station with the sun barely climbing over the peaks. My hands shook too hard to grab the radio. I sat at my desk, trying to breathe, staring at the wall where a map of the park hung marked with pins. Each pin a disappearance. I counted. 8. 8 unsolved faces staring back at me in the silence of that office, and all of them within 3 miles of the cave system. I filed an official report that morning, sanitized, stripped of panic. Unstable terrain, potential hazard. Nothing about breathing earth or bones polished by hands too large to be human. The kind of truth that if spoken aloud would earn me a psychological evaluation instead of backup. But I wasn't done. One more incident broke any illusion that this was something I could observe from a distance. 3 days later, a storm swept through. Heavy snow, wind sweeping down the mountains like the sky wanted to grind the earth flat. I was patrolling near the ranger tower, a tall steel skeleton that creaked with every gust, when the radio crackled weakly. A voice, static, then a word, help. The signal was faint, panicked, broken into ragged breaths. I strained to listen. He's watching. Then nothing but wind. Coordinates pinged on the mobile receiver, West Ridge, near an old logging road. I drove until the tires threatened to lose traction. I hiked the rest. Snow slapped my face, cold slicing through layers. Quincy barked into the storm, ears pinned back. When we reached the ridge, I saw him, a man face down in snow. I rushed forward, turning him over. His skin was an awful shade of grayish blue, eyes glassy, mouth frozen open in terror. But that wasn't what made my blood stop moving. His arm, his entire right arm was missing, not torn, not bitten, gone, removed cleanly. As if something strong and precise had taken it, like someone plucks a branch from a tree. My radio screamed, suddenly alive with interference, a violent buzz ripping into the air. I looked up slowly. Across the clearing, through the sheets of snow, something moved between 2 pines. Big. Upright. Breathing heavy enough that the falling flakes fluttered around its outline. The storm tried to swallow its shape, but even obscured, the mass of it was undeniable. It stood there, unhurried, watching me. The radio fell silent. Quincy growled low, tail stiff, fur bristling like needles. My heart thundered against bone, and for a moment the entire world narrowed to a single truth pulsing in my skull. It wasn't afraid of me. It was deciding. The thing took 1 step forward. Snow crunched deep beneath its weight. I fumbled for my rifle, even though I knew, without knowing how, that bullets were as meaningless to this creature as names whispered into the wind. Then, through the roar of the storm, it spoke, not words shaped for humans, but sound bent crudely into speech. Ranger, just 1 word. The force of it felt physical, like air compressed into a blade. My lungs tightened painfully. I grabbed Quincy and stumbled backward, dragging us both toward the vehicle. The shape didn't chase. It didn't need to. It let me leave, like it wanted me alive, like I had a part to play. I didn't remember driving back. My memory skipped like a scratched record, flashes of road, headlights, my heartbeat pounding so hard it drowned out every thought. I locked Quincy and myself inside the cabin that night. The wind screamed outside. The pines battered the siding like fists, but beneath the storm I heard tapping, 3 slow knocks on the wood, as if a hand the size of my face tapped once for each disappearance the forest refused to forget. I didn't answer, but my fear did. It told me the truth I had been dodging. Whatever lived in those caves was hunting at night, and it knew my name. I didn't open the door that night. I sat on the floor with Quincy pressed against me, his heartbeat racing so hard I could feel it through his ribs. Every muscle in my body waited for something else to happen. Another sound, another knock, something scraping the windows or twisting the doorknob. But nothing came. The silence dragged out so long that it felt like time itself got stuck outside with whatever stood under the porch roof. By morning, the fear didn't fade. It just changed shape. The sunlight hitting my cabin floor didn't bring safety. It exposed the truth that daylight only hides what the night is willing to show. My supervisors thought I was exhausted. They told me to take a few days at lower elevation. Stress, fatigue, altitude, they said. You're pushing yourself too hard. But my exhaustion wasn't physical. It was something pulled tight inside my skull, like the mountain had wrapped a hand around my thoughts and squeezed. I tried to do what they asked. Rest. Breathe. Pretend that the forest didn't have a voice, a memory, an agenda. But as afternoon approached, unease built again. I couldn't escape the feeling that eyes followed me even inside my home. The walls pressed in, shrinking the space between my heartbeat and the next moment something terrible would happen. Staying still felt more dangerous than stepping back into the woods, so I left. I grabbed gear, not search and rescue protocol, not official pack inventory, just what instinct demanded. Headlamp, spare batteries, rope, knife, flare gun. Quincy barked once when he saw the supplies. Not a protest, a readiness. We hiked toward the caves. There are places in a forest where sound disappears. Not dampened, not muted, but swallowed like the air doesn't want to carry noise where it doesn't belong. That day, every step became quieter the deeper we pushed into those pines. The wind died first. Then the branches stopped creaking. Even my breath lost its echo. That silence should have made me turn back. Instead, I checked the magazine in my sidearm, even though I knew bullets meant nothing out here. The cave didn't appear. It waited. The ground simply dropped again where soil should have stretched unbroken. Same slick melt around its edge, but more recent, like the earth had been sweating heavily overnight. The opening looked larger than before, as though something inside had stretched its ribs against the walls in the dark. Quincy whined, a soft, choked sound he couldn't stop. I knelt, placing my hand on his neck. He leaned into it, but his gaze never left the void beneath us. His fear wasn't stubborn, it was loyal. He wouldn't abandon me to this place. I clicked on the headlamp. The cave swallowed the beam whole. I descended. My boots met wet stone. Cold radiated up through the soles, into bone. Walls curved inwards, smooth as polished river rock, except no river had carved this deep. My footsteps echoed, not outward, downward, like there were chambers below, stacked into the earth. Every few feet, I found more marks on the walls, wide grooves spaced evenly, carved in long parallel lines, as though something dragged its fingers along the stone while moving. I didn't let myself imagine the size of those hands anymore. Farther in, the air thickened with a damp scent, moss, decay, and something else, something like fur soaked in stagnant water. Quincy kept close to my leg, muscles tight, breathing in short bursts. Then my light caught something ahead. A tunnel widened into a chamber. Bones littered the ground, animal mostly. Elk skulls split clean, rib cages cracked apart and polished from scraping. But among them, scraps of clothing, bright strips of synthetic fabric, torn jackets, a boot half buried beneath a pile of ribs, a dented metal water bottle, a shredded backpack with a child's patch still clinging to the fabric. The air felt like a throat closing. I stepped deeper into the chamber. My knees wanted to collapse beneath me. Instinct told me to run. Logic told me I was looking at evidence of something impossible. But something else kept me moving, a soft sound that drifted from the far end of the room. A whimper. Human. I turned sharply. The beam shook in my trembling hands, painting the walls in jagged white streaks until it landed on a shape curled near the stone. A man, barely breathing, pale. His eyes snapped open when the light hit him, pupils blown wide in terror. His voice cracked. "Don't let it hear you." Quincy barked sharply, ears pinned back. I dropped to the man's side. He grabbed my jacket, fingers digging into the fabric. "It comes back," he gasped. "It always comes back." "Who?" I whispered. He shook his head, jaw trembling. "Not who. What?" His gaze drifted upward toward a black tunnel that rose like a throat into higher chambers of rock. And then I heard it. A distant scrape, stone against stone. Something heavy shifting, something awake. My pulse slammed through my veins. I pulled the man up. He screamed at the movement, pain shooting through his limbs, but I didn't stop. Quincy barked again, frantic. I swung the headlamp toward the tunnel mouth. A shadow moved, huge, shoulders scraping the stone above it, arms thick as tree trunks, fur shimmering where light touched it, and eyes. I didn't see them clearly. I didn't have to. I felt them, fixed on me, familiar in a way that made my stomach seize. I grabbed the flare gun from my belt. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. Quincy's growl rose into a howl, raw, terrified. The creature stepped into view, massive, a thing sculpted by the earth itself and then abandoned in the dark to grow teeth and hunger. Mist curled off its body like steam rising from a swamp. Its mouth hung slightly open, breath heavy, rancid, like rot buried under years of silence. It tilted its head slowly, studying me. Then, in a voice like rock dragged across ice, "Ranger," I fired. The flare exploded in its face, light bursting through the chamber in violent red. The creature roared, not in pain but surprise, and the sound shattered every thought in my skull. I yanked the man's arm over my shoulder and ran. The chamber shook as the thing moved after us. Not fast, powerful. Each step cracked stone. Quincy kept pace, darting ahead, turning back to bark like he was trying to slow the mountain itself. We reached the slope leading up to daylight. My legs burned, lungs clawing for air. The man sobbed, too weak to stand without me. Behind us, the scraping kept coming. Closer now, louder. Stone fragments skittered past our boots as the tunnel walls trembled. We burst into the cold afternoon light. I didn't stop running, not at the cave mouth, not when Quincy stumbled, not when the man fell and I hauled him to his feet again. I didn't dare glance back. Only when the forest swallowed the cave from view did I collapse, dragging the man into the snow, gasping like the air was burning me. Everything was silent again, too silent. Quincy whined, licking the man's hand. His eyes fluttered. Alive, but barely. I pulled out my radio with numb fingers. My voice cracked, disintegrated into static. But eventually, headquarters answered. They sent a rescue team. They sent medics. They sent questions. I answered none of them truthfully. I couldn't, because even as they loaded the man into the ambulance, even as floodlights turned the forest gold, even as voices reassured me that he would survive, I felt eyes on me again, far away, but fixed, watching from the tree line, not chasing, deciding. It could have taken me in that cave. It didn't. That fact terrified me more than anything else, because whatever lived down there hadn't hunted for hunger. It hunted with purpose, and I was a part of it. I lied to every official who asked me what happened. They wrote it all down as a rescue from exposure, a lucky find, nothing more. The man, his name was McAllister, was too delirious to correct the record, though I saw the truth still clinging to his eyes like a shattered reflection. He stared at the hospital ceiling with the look of someone who had learned something awful about the world, something he wished he could unlearn. Doctors said he might lose some memory. I prayed that he would. I should have walked away. I should have taken the chance that the creature gave me and fled the mountains forever. But there was something worse than fear haunting me now. A question. Why had it let me go? For days, that question gnawed at me. It chewed through my hours, shredded my sleep. I'd bolt upright at night, drenched in sweat, convinced the thing was crouching beside my bed in the dark, eyes gleaming with recognition. Quincy slept pressed against me, trembling through his dreams. On the third night, I dreamed I was back in the cave, not the chamber of bones, but another room deeper inside, carved like a cathedral of stone. I stood alone under a ceiling of jagged stalactites. Shadows swam along the walls as if alive, and I felt something behind me. Not the creature, bigger, like the entire mountain leaned down to whisper in my ear, "Come back." I woke with tears in my eyes. The forest wanted me, not to kill me, to show me something. Morning came and I stared at myself in the mirror, the reflection of a ranger who used to think he understood the difference between courage and stupidity. My face looked thinner, older, as if fear had dug trenches beneath my skin. Quincy whined at the door. "I know," I whispered. We packed again, no supervision, no backup, just us against the truth buried under the roots of the Rockies. The sky hung low, clouds smothering the peaks like the weather tried to hide what lived beneath. Snow fell lightly, flakes drifting like dead ash. The forest didn't sway or sing. It stood still, watchful, every pine trunk like a column in a temple that was never meant for human worship. I walked. Not fast, not slow, the kind of pace you keep when you've accepted what's waiting. As we approached the cave, a hush fell over everything. Even my thoughts seemed too loud. Quincy pressed so close I could feel each tremor in his muscles. The entrance now looked like a wound torn into the ground, wider than before, edges ragged, earth caving inward as though something massive had clawed its way out recently. That should have stopped me. It didn't. I descended. The tunnels breathed deeper now. The air pulsed warm, then cold, like lungs trying to remember how to inhale sunlight. My headlamp flickered, not from bad batteries, but because the dark here resisted light. Every step sank me deeper into a place that hated being seen. Then, voices. Many of them. Not speaking words, but murmuring, layered like wind caught in a maze. They surrounded me, reverberating off stone, rising higher the farther I went. Quincy whimpered. I fought the instinct to turn around. The tunnel opened into the large chamber again, the one with scattered bones and torn gear. But something had changed. The bones were gone. All of them. Cleared away like someone tidying a room before company arrives. The stone floor had been swept smooth, and on the far wall, etched deep into the rock, was something new. 5 symbols. Vertical slashes with curved hooks at the ends, like tall, crude figures standing shoulder to shoulder. They looked familiar and foreign all at once, but my gut knew before my brain caught up, 5 disappearances before winter. 1 symbol for each. My knees turned liquid. I aimed my light at the marks, unable to look away. Once for the hiker, once for the couple, once for Barnes, once for the boy, once for McAllister. Not just trophies, not warnings, a record. But there had been 8 disappearances. Where were the other 3 symbols? Quincy barked sharply. Not a challenge, panic. I swung my light. On the opposite wall, freshly carved, still shedding flakes of rock. 3 more slashes. 1 symbol, larger than the rest. My body froze in place. The monster wasn't tallying its kills. It was counting something else, claiming something. And the pause after the 5th, the gap before the 6th, that was me. The air shifted. A vibration trembled through the chamber floor. Then, from deeper in the tunnel beyond darkness even my flashlight couldn't pierce, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to make stalactites tremble. The voices fell silent. Even the cave held its breath. Quincy pressed against me, tail pinned, eyes burning with animal terror. I raised the flare gun again, but something inside me already knew. Light wasn't the answer here. The creature stepped into view. No rush, no roar. It emerged like a king returning to his throne. Towering, fur matted with soil and scars, muscles bulging beneath a hide shaped by centuries without sunlight. Its head brushed low rock. Its breath fogged the air in steam that smelled like buried rain. Those eyes, they weren't animal. They weren't human. They were ancient. It stared at me, not like prey, like a memory. Then it spoke, not in a broken mimicry this time, clearer, still warped by a throat built for growls, but unmistakably intentional. Before the pines, before the men, this was ours. The voice rumbled through my bones like thunder trapped underground. I couldn't speak. My throat locked. The creature took another step. Snow that had clung to my boots melted instantly from the heat of its breath. Quincy barked once, weak, defiant. The creature lowered its face to mine. I could see its teeth, flat molars in the back, sharp canines in front, built for tearing and grinding. A predator evolved to survive below the earth's skin. Then it pointed one thick finger toward the wall of carved slashes. "You return," it said. 2 words, 2 worst words of my life. I shook my head. "No, I don't belong here." The creature erupted in a sound that knocked the argument from my lungs, a guttural roar that scraped something ancient awake in my blood. Quincy yelped, curling behind me. "You return," it repeated, more forceful. A memory knifed through me, something I hadn't recalled in years. A childhood camping trip near these same ridges, one night lost in the woods, trees shaped wrong, a voice calling from the dark. They found me the next morning, unscathed, asleep beside a cave they'd never been able to locate again. And I remembered a whisper in that darkness. A name. My name. The creature stared like it already knew I remembered. "You left," it growled, "but the mountain remembers." My legs buckled. I sank to my knees. The lamp shook in my grip. Quincy cried softly, nudging my arm. The creature leaned closer. Wait, not menace. Expectation. I swallowed, lungs refusing to fill. Wait for what? Its lips peeled back over teeth. To come home. The chamber dimmed. The walls seemed to exhale. The tunnel behind the creature opened wider, as if the mountain itself wanted to swallow me back into whatever destiny I had escaped years ago. I staggered backward. "I'm not like you." It stared through me. "You are ours." It stepped forward, and the symbols on the wall seemed to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. One of the tall slash marks, the 6th, began bleeding damp soil from the carved lines. The creature reached out its hand, a hand bigger than my chest, waiting, inviting, claiming. Quincy snapped, tiny sound, dwarfed by the cavern's weight, but it snapped me back to myself. I fired the last flare. The creature recoiled as fire spilled across its fur, light bursting violently through the chamber. I grabbed Quincy and sprinted. The cave screamed behind us, stone cracking, footsteps thunderous as a landslide. Up the tunnel, out through the freezing air. The woods tore past in motion-blurred panic. I didn't breathe until the mouth of the cave was gone behind us, until the forest swallowed its darkness. Only then did I collapse. Snow stung my palms. Quincy pressed into me, shaking. The forest was silent again, but silence no longer meant safety, because I had seen what lived beneath the pines, what had lived there before we ever walked upright, what still remembered our footsteps. I looked back once, just once, and in the far shadows between trunks, something massive shifted. Watching, waiting, not chasing, because chases end. This wasn't the end. It was recognition. There are stories locals whisper in these mountains, stories I used to ignore, stories I used to smile away. They talk about eyes in the dark, caves that breathe, a creature older than the frost on these peaks. Now I understand the truth behind those whispers. The forest doesn't fear us, it remembers us. And one day, it might ask for us back. I still patrol these woods, not because I'm brave, not because I'm foolish, but because I know the eyes behind the timberline haven't forgotten me. I feel them when the wind dies. I hear them when night falls silent. Sometimes in the deepest dark, a voice calls from the tree line, "Ranger." Every time I lock the door, every time I tremble, because one night I will answer, and when I do, I won't return alone. The mountain will take me home. I've devoted my life to the woods, but I'd be lying if I said I still believe they always welcomed me. There are nights when the pines feel like ribs closing around a heart, and the wind doesn't whistle, it whispers. I used to think the forest was passive, just standing and watching. Now I know it remembers. It judges. And if you stay long enough, it speaks. My name is Ryder. I'm 36 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life working as a forest ranger in the mountainous backcountry of northern Washington. Here, the trees grow taller than church steeples and older than any town nearby. The air itself feels ancient, and when you inhale, you're breathing in something older than humans ever had a right to touch. Locals call this region the Pine Sentinel District, but off-duty they use another name, the Dead Quiet. They'll make the sign with their hand, not religious, but ritualistic, like they're warding off something invisible. They say if you stray too deep, the silence will find you and keep you. I never believed any of that when I first arrived. I was young, eager, a little reckless. I thought my badge and my training meant something more than they did. I was here to protect hikers, maintain trails, and keep the peace. What could possibly scare me? Bears, cougars, weather? That was all part of the job. But the job didn't stay simple. Not here. There are nights still burned into my memory, nights when the hush between the trees isn't calm. It's alert, when you feel like the moss is waiting, when the shadows tilt their heads as you pass. The first time I felt truly unwelcome was my second month on the job. Late summer, hot days, cool evenings, the kind that lull you into thinking life is peaceful and predictable. I was sent to check out an abandoned campsite reported by a hiker. A tent folded flat on itself like the wind had crushed it, gear strewn around, fire burned out, no blood, no tracks, no signs of wildlife intrusion, just absence. A life paused in mid-motion. I filed the report and forgot it, or tried to. A week later, a pair of teenagers were found wandering the road 5 miles from that same site. No shoes, dehydrated, confused, mumbling, the tall man like a prayer. Their parents came to get them from the hospital, but the kids couldn't stop staring at the tree line outside, eyes wide like something might step out and claim them back. That case was sealed as trauma-induced shock. I didn't forget it. People disappear in the woods all the time. Most come back, some don't. We've got explanations for every category: accidents, exposure, animals. But where do you file someone who comes back without their shoes, without their memory, and with new words carved into their fear? That was only the beginning. My station sits alone along a series of gravel roads that spider through the forest. The building is small, old, always smelling faintly of pine tar and damp paper. Nights on shift are quiet. Too quiet sometimes, with nothing but static on the radio and the tick of cooling wood on the roof. But I used to love those nights. I'd sit with my coffee, listening to crickets chirping outside, watching the stars shift over the ridge. A simple life, a good life. One where I believed the trees were just trees. Then came the noise. It was around 2:30 a.m. early autumn when a single knock rattled the back door. It wasn't loud. It wasn't panicked. Just one precise, polite tap, like someone who knew me well enough not to be rude. I froze. No one visits the station at night. If you need help, you radio for it. And even then, patrols meet you out on the trail. This post is meant for rangers, not visitors, and especially not strangers in the dark. I stood up slowly, the chair's legs scraping the ground like a warning I should have listened to. I unclipped the pistol holstered by my hip as I moved toward the door. Another knock. Same sound. Same waiting. The peephole faced only blackness, no porch light, nothing but a sliver of moon above the trees. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Hello? Who's there? No reply, no shuffle of movement. Just a breeze lifting pine needles like a whisper against the window screens. I thought about calling dispatch. I should have. Instead, I cracked the door open 2 inches. My breath caught in my chest. Nothing stood there. No footprints. No retreating figure. Only the dark. I shut the door fast and locked it. I checked every window, made sure every latch was sealed. I told myself it was the wind, a branch falling, anything that would make sense. But the fear didn't leave. It walked the edges of the room with me all night. When morning came, I pretended it never happened. I buried that memory under work and routine. The safest place to hide fear is deeper than you're willing to dig. The woods didn't let me forget. One evening not long after that, I was out on trail patrol, about 9 miles deep, checking for illegal campsites. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, turning the pines into tall black silhouettes. As the light fell away, the world turned unnaturally quiet. Even the insects stopped. The stillness made my skin crawl. I heard footsteps, not behind me, beside me, keeping pace. Leaves shifting, twigs flexing under weight too heavy to be a deer, too slow to be a cougar. I aimed my flashlight toward the noise. Nothing. Just trees. Just the empty, endless woods. Then the smell hit. A foul, musky stench, like wet fur and blood that had been left out too long. It curled in my nose, bitter and thick, like it didn't belong to anything that should exist here. My instincts screamed to get back to the station. I turned, quickening my pace, trying not to break into a run. Panic invites chase. The footsteps followed, not closer, not farther, just beside me. Matching me, acknowledging me. I forced myself to stay calm, counting breaths, one hand near my bear spray, the other brushing the radio mic strapped to my vest. I didn't look, couldn't look, until the footsteps stopped. I spun the light toward the trees. The beam caught only black bark and deeper black between trunks. But for a heartbeat, just one, I saw a flash of eyes, pale, circular, too high above the ground for any known animal. I blinked, and the shimmer vanished. My lungs forgot to work. My brain refused to process what I had seen. Instinct took over. I turned and ran. Branches snagged my jacket. Roots tried to hook my boots. The stench followed, thick as fog, pushing me forward with terror until I burst back into the clearing near the service road. I stood there shaking, choking down air like someone had been keeping it from me. The forest behind me looked perfectly still, as if nothing had ever walked there. That night, I sat in the darkened station, lights turned off, radio silent, holding my breath again every time a pine needle tapped the window. It felt like the trees were gathered around me in a circle, waiting to see if I'd run again. Fear changes you. It rearranges your bones. It makes a grown man feel like prey. I told myself I'd stay strong. I'd keep doing my job. I just didn't know that the woods had only shown me their first warning. They had much darker truths waiting under those branches, truths that would tear apart everything I believed about nature, about survival, about myself. And the locals, they weren't afraid for no reason. They were afraid because they had seen more than I had. And the pines, they don't forget. It didn't take long before I learned that fear doesn't fade. It adapts. It changes shape to suit the landscape. And here in the Pine Sentinel District, the fear always fits the trees. A few days after that night patrol, an older man came into the ranger station. He leaned heavily on his walking stick, boots worn down to smooth leather, hat pulled low as if the shadows might see his face. He introduced himself simply as Everett, a lifelong resident of the valley below the ridge. He smelled faintly of wood smoke and cold river water. "You been out by the Sentinel trails lately?" he asked. Across the desk, I nodded slowly. "Routine patrols. Why?" He stared at me the way a parent looks at a child about to touch a stove. "Then you've heard it, or seen it." His knuckles tightened on the stick. "Tell me the truth, son. The forest has been moving, hasn't it?" I didn't answer, not because I doubted him, but because a part of me, the part that still clung to logic, didn't want to say it out loud. Admitting fear gives it a throat, a voice. He nodded anyway, understanding the silence. "Stay out of those woods once the sun drops," Everett warned. "If you hear the steps beside you, don't look. If you see eyes in a place no eyes should be, don't stare. And if it knocks, never open the door." My breath caught. My hand, hidden below the desk, curled into a fist to hide the tremor. "What is it?" I whispered. Everett swallowed. His voice cracked like ice under weight. "Some call it the Tall Man, others the White Walker, or the Ghost of the Pines. Me, I think the forest has a memory, and sometimes it sends reminders of what it wants to keep." He tapped his stick twice on the concrete floor, like a ritual, then walked out without another word. I watched him leave, feeling cold seep under my skin. That night, I sat awake long after my shift ended, listening. Every creak, every gust through the needles felt like a visitor testing the walls. I kept the lights low and the windows latched, repeating Everett's warning in my head. "If it knocks, never open the door." A week passed without another encounter. Maybe the forest was humoring me. Maybe it was waiting. The truth revealed itself in fragments, like glimpses between trees. Never enough to grab, always enough to dread. Then I got a call. A missing hiker, mid-40s, solo backpacker, last seen near the deep cave systems north of the ridge. Those caves are older than anything humans have named. The rock walls feel like the ribs of the earth itself. They sink into darkness, where your flashlight beam starts shaking, not from your hand, but from something inside the dark responding. I drove out before sunrise, dust trailing behind the truck like smoke from a ritual fire. The trail was narrow, roots coiling like snakes above the soil. Birds chirped at first, but when I got closer to the caves, they stopped singing all at once. Silence settled like a blanket smothering their voices. I found the hiker's pack near the entrance. Zipper torn. Not cut. Torn. The fabric edges frayed outward as if something powerful had forced its way out, or something inside had pushed through. Beside the bag lay a water bottle, dented and smeared with mud. Or blood. I reported the findings, waited for backup, but impatience and instinct twisted together inside me. Against procedure, against reason, I stepped into the cave. The air changed instantly. Outside, the world had felt alive, breathing, watching. Inside, everything was still. It smelled of minerals and moisture, and a musk that reminded me too much of that night on patrol. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating walls slick with condensation. The ground sloped downward into a corridor barely wide enough for my shoulders. My heartbeat echoed through the stone. I told myself I'd go just 10 feet deeper. Just look for signs. Then I heard it. A drag. Not a step, not a slip. A drag, like something heavy was being pulled. I froze, holding my breath. The sound came again, closer. I turned the light down the corridor, and the darkness swallowed it whole. The cave seemed to tighten around me, as if the earth wanted to pull me deeper. My chest constricted. Sweat trickled like ice down my spine, another drag. This time accompanied by a low, wet exhale. It sounded too large for any human, too intentional for any animal. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight as my boots scraped against stone. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something huge, something alive, something that knew I was there. When the exhale came again, it brushed the hair on the back of my neck. I ran. Crawling, scrambling, cutting my palms on jagged rock, I burst back into daylight, gasping like a drowning man. I didn't stop until I reached the truck. Even then, I kept glancing at the cave entrance. Nothing emerged, but the air felt wrong, disturbed, as if something had followed me. Not outside, but in my mind. Backup arrived 30 minutes later. We searched deeper with proper equipment. We found the hiker. At least, we found what was left. He lay half buried in loose gravel, his skin bluish-white and stretched tight like wax paper. His mouth hung open, eyes wide, frozen mid-terror. There were no claw marks, no predator bites, no wounds. He looked like the life had been drained straight from the inside. The official cause of death read, extreme exposure and shock, but every ranger present knew exposure didn't twist someone's face into a silent scream. That evening, back at the station, a radio call came through from another ranger, Lily, tough, smart, someone who never let fear show in her eyes. "Ryder, I'm heading in," she said, her voice low, urgent. "Activities increasing on the western ridge. Locals are calling in sightings. Tall figure, moving between the trees. I'll report if I find anything." I wanted to tell her to turn back, to wait for backup, to breathe for 1 minute before stepping into something she couldn't understand, something I barely could. But protocol held my tongue hostage. "Copy. Keep your radio on you," I replied. "I'll monitor from here." Static answered. Then her voice again, but strained. "Just saw something, standing by the old fire tower, tall, too tall." The radio crackled like the frequency itself was scared to carry her words. "I thought it was a tree," she whispered, "but trees don't turn their heads." I stood up so fast the chair crashed behind me. "Lily, get out of there, now." I heard her breathing, short, sharp, the sound of a heart realizing it's the smaller animal. "It's walking," she said, "toward me." Static burst again, the kind that feels like a scream you can't hear. "Lily, move!" I shouted into the mic. Her breathing vanished. Then a single sound came through the radio. 3 heavy knocks. Slow. Even. Patient. Not on wood. On metal. Her truck. My vision spun, and for a moment I couldn't feel my own body. Only the cold, only the forest pushing in from every direction. I yelled her name again and again into the radio, but nothing came back. It took rescue teams nearly an hour to find Lily's truck on the ridge. Driver's door open, radio still on, mic dangling like a severed cord. She wasn't there. Her rifle lay in the dirt, unfired. The only footprints around belonged to her. And one set of impressions beside the truck. Too deep, too far apart, too human in shape and not human at all. When I returned to the station that night, the walls felt thinner. The windows looked like excuses, and the air inside tasted like the cave, damp and unclean. I sat in silence for hours. Then I heard it. The knock. 3 slow taps on the back door, not frantic, not confused. The same rhythm I'd heard on the radio, the same patience as before. Every instinct screamed for me to run. But where do you run when the forest is everywhere? I closed my eyes, listening to my pulse thunder against the fear. My hand hovered over the lock. Everett's voice filled my head. If it knocks, never open the door. The knocking stopped as if whoever, whatever, stood outside already knew my choice. Silence settled again, heavy and absolute, and the pines breathed against the walls. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the dim glow of my desk lamp until the sun stretched pale fingers over the ridge. I kept waiting for the knock to return, or for the door to open on its own. Lily's abandoned truck stayed burned into my mind. No distress call, no gunshot, no scream. She had been here, strong, unshakable, and the forest had taken her like she never mattered. By morning, a search group assembled. Dogs, drones, experienced boots moving through terrain that locals refused to step into. They combed the ridge, the riverbed, the caves. They found nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a drop of blood, not a single step taken away from the truck, as if she'd been lifted by the air itself. Some rangers whispered that she quit and ran off. Others called it kidnapping. I told them nothing. I held my truth behind teeth clenched so tight they ached. And the pines, they watched us searching. 3 nights later, a local woman showed up at the station, shaking, barefoot, leaves tangled in her hair. Her name was Margot, Everett's daughter. She clung to the counter between us, eyes wild and unfocused. "He's missing," she said. "Dad hasn't come home." My stomach dropped. Everett, the only one who warned me, the only one who looked me in the eyes and knew, gone. "What happened?" I asked gently. She swallowed, voice trembling like a leaf pinned in place by fear. "He said something was hunting out there, something old, something that takes people who see too much." She wiped tears from her face, leaving streaks of dirt. "He left to try and help someone. He said the forest kept their souls, and that if he listened close enough, he could hear them." I guided her to a chair and called for medical assistance, but she grabbed my arm with startling strength. "You have to stop looking for Lily. That's what it wants. Attention. It needs eyes." Her grip tightened. The more you notice it, the closer it gets. Her voice cracked, then fell to a whisper. "Don't let it learn your name." A cold spike pierced through me. "How would it learn my name?" I asked. She stared at me like she wished she hadn't said that. Then she leaned closer, breath shaking against my ear. "It listens." A shiver dragged down my back. She released my arm and curled into herself, rocking gently. I stepped away, feeling her warning claw at my chest. Later, when the paramedics took her into town, I walked out behind the station to clear my head. Everett's walking stick stood propped against a pine tree. Alone, as though something had placed it there. Not dropped. Not forgotten. Placed. The days blurred after that, long hours of searching, restless nights filled with silence that sounded too deep. Radios crackled only with static. Birds fled the forest earlier each evening. And every night I waited for the knock. Sometimes I convinced myself I imagined it all, that Lily walked off, that Everett wandered too far, that fear was writing its own story inside me. But fear doesn't invent footprints. A morning call came in from a fellow ranger, Sam. He'd found tracks near the old fire road, long strides embedded deep in the dirt. He sent me the photos. Not bear. Not elk. Not human. The impressions were too narrow, too elongated, flattened at the tips like something had walked on bone instead of flesh. And they weren't moving forward. They circled the road, pacing a spot where headlights had recently stopped. I recognized the location. Lily's truck had been parked there. My chest tightened until breathing felt like swallowing glass. I stared at those footprints, feeling like the world had shifted into something living, watching, waiting to strike again. "What do you think did it?" Sam asked later, voice tight with unease. I told him the only thing that made sense, even though my voice shook. "It's following us." Sam didn't argue. That silence between us spoke louder than fear. By the end of the week, search teams scaled back. The official stance: we will continue investigations as new information becomes available. Unofficially, we'd found nothing, and the forest wanted it that way. Rangers rotated shifts. I stayed on nights. Maybe part of me wanted to challenge whatever stalked the dark. Maybe part of me wanted answers. Maybe I was too scared to let the sun leave me alone with my thoughts. Either way, I was here when the next incident came. Just after midnight, the radio flickered to life. A hiker screaming. Static shredded his words, but I caught enough to freeze every muscle in my body. Something. Chasing. Tall. Help. Then a sound like bones snapping, followed by silence and breathing. Slow. Heavy. Inhuman. I grabbed my rifle and bolted to the truck. The tires tore gravel as floodlights cut through the trees. The signal came from Dead Hollow Trailhead, a place the locals refused to go after dark. The forest swallowed sound as I drove. The engine growled, but outside the windows the world felt muted. Even the wind seemed voiceless, like the trees were holding their breath. Then the headlights found him, the hiker, sprawled in the middle of the trail. I jumped out and ran toward him, calling out, "Hey, I'm here. You're okay." But as I got closer, I understood that he wasn't. His body lay twisted, limbs bent at wrong angles, not broken, just rearranged. His face pointed up, eyes wide, not with pain, but with awe, like he had seen something magnificent. His mouth hung open in a shape that wasn't a scream, but a question. "What did you see?" I kneeled, hands shaking, searching for a pulse. The radio on his vest crackled, hissing. Then, through the static, thud, thud, thud. 3 knocks. Right behind me. I turned, slowly, because every inch of my body begged me not to look. There, beyond the headlights, something stood just outside the light's reach. A silhouette, a suggestion. Something too tall, too narrow, motionless yet breathing. I didn't raise my weapon. I didn't speak. I couldn't. If fear were a person, it would have been the hand squeezing my throat. Then came the smell. The same clinging musk from that patrol night. Wet fur and old blood. Behind me, a second radio, mine, burst with static. A familiar voice whispered through it. "Ryder." I froze. It was Lily. Not quite her voice, stretched thinner, pulled too tight, but her tone, her fear, her breath. "Ryder, don't look." Her whisper carried the broken fragility of someone who knew exactly what was standing in front of me. My flashlight slipped from my fingers and rolled across the ground. The silhouette stepped back, slow, deliberate. Not fleeing, retreating with intent. Like this wasn't the hunt, just a warning. Then the forest returned to silence and the breathing vanished. The smell lingered, heavy like it wanted to stay. Then that too, faded. I forced myself to breathe again. I called in the incident. They arrived quickly this time. Maybe they had begun to believe me. The hiker's body was taken away. The report would say suspected animal attack, but every ranger who stood under those pines that night knew better. Something was hunting us, and it knew our names now. When I returned to the station, exhaustion hit like a falling tree. I didn't bother with lights. I sat in the dark, rifle across my lap, listening to the pulse in my ears. The forest had taken Lily, Everett, the hiker, maybe others we hadn't found. And now it was speaking directly to me. I tried to think rationally, to pull myself back into a world where things made sense, but logic was useless now. Reason was a dying language here. What remained was instinct, ancient, primal, honest. Fear. I stared at the back door, the same one it had knocked on. A single question gnawed its way into my skull. How long until those knocks turned into a hand on the lock? My eyes burned, my pulse throbbed. I whispered to myself a pathetic attempt at courage. I won't give in. The walls seemed to lean closer, like the forest had ears pressed against them. That night, the knocking didn't come, which somehow terrified me even more, because the woods had grown patient, and patience means planning. Sleep became something other people did. I spent nights sitting in a chair facing the door, waiting for the knock that might return, or the lock that might turn. But the silence changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was a tension. By day, the forest looked unchanged, but the pines swayed in a rhythm I didn't recognize, as if they were moving in time with something below the soil. Birds avoided certain branches. Elk tracks circled hollow trees and veered away sharply, like even the animals had drawn invisible borders. I started noticing patterns, too. The places where the footsteps followed me, those were the places that connected to the cave system. The places Everett warned me about. The places where Lily had gone missing. Everything pointed downward, into the dark. One afternoon while I was reviewing reports, a ranger dropped off a package. No sender listed. Just my name, written in shaky letters that looked like the ink shook with the hand that wrote it. Inside, a simple cassette tape and a note scrawled on torn cardboard. If you hear them, don't answer. My breath caught. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. I recognized the scent of wood smoke and wet moss clinging to the box. Everett. I grabbed the recorder from the supply closet, one of those old handheld models we keep for trail documentation, and slid the tape inside. The sound crackled to life for a moment. Silence, then a voice. Everett's, but quieter, hollow, trembling. It learned my name. Static hissed like wind through dead branches. Lily is alive. It's keeping her. It keeps all of them. Deep down, where the earth has a heartbeat. I gripped the recorder so hard my knuckles went bloodless. It doesn't walk like us. It doesn't hunt like us. It doesn't feed like us. A pause, a shaky exhale. If it knocks, that means it wants a new shape, a new voice. The sound of rocks scraping. Everett coughing. I've seen it. It wears the forest like a coat, like skin, but underneath. The recorder whined, his voice breaking under something unseen. Too many teeth. Too many eyes. Too tall. Bones shouldn't stretch like that. They shouldn't. A sudden slam, like the tape recorder hit stone, followed by Everett's ragged breathing. Then, faint, far away, a voice that wasn't his. A voice I recognized. Ryder. Lily's voice. But wrong. Distorted. Pulled tight like tendons stretched too far. Everett screamed. The tape cut. The player clicked off. I stood rooted in place, shaking so violently the device rattled against my palm. The air inside the station felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were leaning toward the sound. I pulled the tape out and stared at it, this fragile little thing containing proof that Lily was out there, somewhere deeper than human hands could reach. Alive, or something close to it. That night, I walked outside with the recorder clutched tight. The moon was a sliver, barely enough to outline the pines. They towered like solemn guardians, or prison bars. I stepped close to the tree line. Lily! I called out, not smart, not safe, but fear makes fools of all of us. The woods didn't answer at first. Then a breeze stirred the needles, carrying her voice back to me. Ryder, I spun, flashlight cutting through shadow, but nothing stood there. Help me, she whispered from another direction. I turned again. Nothing. Down here. The voice drifted from beneath the ground, from the cave's direction, vibrating through the soil into my bones. My legs nearly buckled. The forest had found another way to speak, not with presence, but with promise. I turned back toward the station, but a shape stepped from behind a tree, antlers rising above its head. My soul froze. What the? But then it stepped fully into the moonlight. A deer. Just a deer. Its sides quivered with fear, eyes wide like it was seeing something behind me, something worse than me. It tore off into the dark, crashing through brush with frantic desperation. Whatever scared that animal had already chosen me. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know what the cave was keeping, what it had done to Lily, what it wanted from Everett, what it wanted from me. At dawn the next day, I geared up. Full tactical kit, extra batteries, flares, rope, emergency beacon. Backup was miles out. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I wasn't leaving someone else behind again. The cave entrance yawned before me like an open throat, stones slick with cold sweat. I switched on my headlamp and stepped inside. The darkness swallowed the light faster this time, like it remembered me. Every footstep echoed like hollow bones striking earth. The deeper I went, the more the air thickened, heavy with that same musk, the same stink of death breathing too close to life. And then came the sounds. A drip here, a slide there, but layered beneath them, voices. Whispers pressed through stone. Some sobbed, some begged, some laughed. A broken, delirious sound that scraped across my nerves. Then I heard her. "Ryder, please." It was Lily's real voice this time, hoarse, strained, terrified. No distortion, no echo, pure fear. "Hold on," I cried, stumbling deeper, light shaking. The passage narrowed until the rock squeezed around me like ribs closing in. "Ryder." She sobbed again, closer now, echo trembling around corners. I crawled forward, scraping my knees raw. My pack snagged on jagged rock, and then the cave opened into a vast chamber, a cathedral carved by darkness. My beam scanned the ceiling, too high to see, the floor wrong, uneven, piles of something pale, bones, hundreds of them, skulls, ribs, femurs, antlers tangled in human remains. My stomach lurched, but before nausea hit, I saw movement. In the far corner, a figure knelt, arms wrapped around itself, head lowered, hair matted with earth. Lily. I ran toward her, heart surging, but halfway there I stopped. The shape trembled, then lifted its head. Her face was wrong. Eyes too wide, skin stretched too tight, lips split by a grin she didn't choose. Her mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. "Thank you for coming." I stepped back instinctively, feet crunching bone. Lily's body jerked once, then pulled upward by invisible strings, bones cracking softly like twigs bending beneath weight. She stood tall, too tall. Her limbs lengthened, joints sliding into positions nature never allowed. Her jaw unhinged slightly, and from deep within that throat came a breath, that vile, rotting breath, and the smell hit me again. Wet fur, old blood, the musk of something that shouldn't exist. The Pines creature was wearing her, skin like a borrowed coat, eyes like stolen stars, teeth shifting behind her lips like they couldn't decide on a shape. "Ryder," it crooned. Her voice and something beneath it, layered, ancient, hungry. I stumbled back, the beam shaking so violently it sliced light across bone piles like lightning. Then it spoke again, still wearing her face. "You've been listening." Its body snapped forward, spine arching. "You've been watching." Another bend, joints cracking like frost splitting wood. "And now." It leaned closer, too close, the pupils inside those ghostly eyes quivering like trapped insects. "We can finally see you." A scream tore from my throat, animal, instinctive, and I bolted, scrambling over bones, slipping, falling, clawing toward the tunnel. Its footsteps followed, heavy but eerily graceful, closing distance at a pace that mocked mine. I slammed into walls, shredded my hands on rock, lungs burning until they tasted of iron. I could hear it behind me, not running, walking, enjoying the chase. I burst into daylight, gasping, sunlight like a violent rebirth, and collapsed on the forest floor. Behind me, the cave waited, silent, unbothered, satisfied, because it knew I would come back. It had Lily's face now, and it was learning mine. I reported Lily's body as unrecovered, the cave sealed as hazardous, access restricted indefinitely. But none of that matters, because the real fight doesn't happen in sunlight. It happens when the pines begin whispering my name at night, when the silence leans against the door. And when the knocking finally returns, I can feel it watching me even now, patient, curious, trying to understand how my bones might bend, what my voice might sound like from inside its throat. And, worst of all, a small, broken part of me wants to go back, not out of bravery, but because Lily is still alive in there, screaming behind that stolen smile. It's strange, the things your mind holds onto when fear becomes the air you breathe, not the screams, Not the bones, not even the towering horror wearing the faces of people you failed. What I remember most clearly is the sound of the pines just outside the cave, whispering, swaying, alive, calling me back. The forest had taken so much already, my trust, my colleagues, the safety of my own mind, and yet it wasn't satisfied. The silence promised more suffering to come. It awaited my curiosity, my inevitable return. But I didn't go back. Not right away. For weeks after the cave, I existed in half light. Days spent forcing myself to follow procedures, process reports, pretend the woods weren't closing in. Nights spent staring at the door, waiting for a shape to blot out the moonlight. Other rangers drifted through the station like ghosts, cautious, quieter, eyes avoiding windows once dusk arrived. We never spoke about Lily. Not publicly, not officially. Missing persons paperwork doesn't include the category taken by the forest. And no one dared mention Everett, though the walking stick remained propped against that same tree, weathered now by rain and sun. A memorial, a warning, a promise. The tape sat on my desk every night, untouched, but never ignored. I would stare at it and wonder if those voices were still breathing inside the magnetic coils. If Everett, or what remained of him, could still feel time passing up here. Then one night, as a storm rolled over the ridges, lightning flashed, and something appeared outside the window. 2 eyes. Not close, not rushing the glass. Just watching, gleaming like pale lanterns between the trunks. No body visible beneath them, only height. A vertical presence that didn't belong to flesh. The knock followed, slow, precise. 3 taps, a cold echo through the wood. Every nerve in my body fired at once. The doorframe groaned like it felt the weight of the thing behind it. The rifle was in my hands before I realized I'd moved out, barrel trembling. My voice cracked, brittle. "Leave me alone." The wind answered instead, a long, low moan dragging through branches that bent like they were bowing to something terrible. The doorknob twitched, just once, a shiver of metal under pressure. I held my breath until the storm swallowed everything, the rain drowning the forest's whispers. And then silence came again. Silence that wasn't peace. Silence that was patience. The next morning, I found footprints outside. Deep impressions leading away from the station and circling back again. The ground beneath the windows was disturbed, as though something had been crouching there, inches from where I slept. I followed the tracks into the trees, heart pounding. The prints went farther this time, deeper into the brush, then stopped at a clearing. In the center lay a tuft of brown hair and a torn sleeve, fabric from a uniform. Lily's. Something cold settled into my chest. A feeling I recognized not as fear, but determination. The forest wanted me to follow. It wanted me to chase. Good. Because this time, I would not be prey running for daylight. I would be a ranger walking into his damn job. I returned to the cave with a plan. Rope anchored to a tree outside, glow sticks marking my path, a flare clipped to my vest. The air tasted like metal as I stepped inside. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back. Every instinct in me screamed that Lily still needed me. Survival versus duty, fear versus memory, reason versus belief. The whispers started quickly, distant voices breathing through stone, 100 threads of desperation weaving into a chorus. Some begged, some prayed. One called my name, Ryder. Not mocking this time, fragile, human. Help! I pressed forward, crouching under jagged ceilings, boots slipping on moisture-slick rock. The bone chamber was closer than I remembered. The air vibrating with something alive, something ancient. When I reached the chamber, I didn't call her name. I whispered it. For me, not for the creature. Lily, movement answered, slow, deliberate. A silhouette rose from the corner, limbs bending, lengthening, cracking. It wore her face again, but not like before. This time, the expression twisted with pain, eyes bulging wide, mouth trembling as if Lily's soul fought behind the puppet strings. "Let her go," I said, voice shaking. The creature tilted her head, the bones in her neck clicking like shifting stones. "You came back," it replied, voices layered, scraping against each other like teeth. The bones around us rattled, a sound like applause from the dead. "You belong here," it told me. "The forest remembers fear, and you are teaching it so well." It stepped toward me, each movement unnatural, flowing and jerking at the same time. Its hair brushed the cave roof. Its arms stretched to the floor. I aimed the rifle and saw Lily's eyes behind those wrong, drifting pupils. She blinked. A tear slipped. I hesitated, and the creature smiled through her lips. It lunged. I rolled aside, bones shattered beneath my boots, and fired. The bullet slammed into its shoulder, exploding shards of white beneath the stolen skin. It screamed, not in pain, but annoyance. "You cannot hurt what the forest grows," it snarled. It rushed me, limbs spidering, joints bending with impossible freedom. I fired again and again, bullets ripping flesh but not slowing it. It climbed the walls, the ceiling, skittering downward like a nightmare learning new physics. Jagged claws erupted from fingertips no longer hers. I hit the flare and threw it down, red fire blazing over bone piles, shadows leaping like demons freed. The creature recoiled, shrieking, its flesh bubbling like wax under heat. I surged forward, grabbing Lily's stolen body, and slammed a glow stick into its chest to burn sulfur and light into whatever hollow place it used as a heart. Its face, her face, twisted, contorted, pleading. Not the creature. Lily. I saw the real her in those trembling eyes, begging silently, "End this." I raised the rifle. A single clean shot. Lily collapsed, the body crumpling, deflating, bones snapping back into human length, the monstrosity evaporating like smoke burned by dawn. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into my arms, tears burning through the grit on my face. Her eyes fluttered. For an instant, an impossible moment, they were hers again. "Thank you," she whispered, voice like the last ember of a dying fire. Then she went still. The cave sighed, the walls sagging, bones settling. But the forest wasn't finished. The darkness behind me exhaled. I turned and saw dozens of eyes staring from the tunnel. Not Lily's, not Everett's, not human. This wasn't one creature, it was the woods themselves. The cave shook, stones cracking overhead. The pines rumbled, as if angered by the death of one of its stolen vessels. It would come for me next. I ran, clawing through the tunnel, scraping skin raw, gasping, bleeding, begging gravity to pull me faster toward daylight. Just when the walls felt ready to crush me, I burst into sunlight. The forest shrieked behind me, trees rattling like bones, dirt heaving like lungs. But the pines did not cross into the sun. Their power was shade, shadow, silence. I collapsed on the forest floor again, the world spinning, and for the first time in weeks, the pines were quiet. Lily was gone. Everett was gone. Dozens unnamed were gone, and the thing beneath the trees would keep growing new voices, new skins, new memories stolen from the living. I stared into those endless woods and understood something the badge never taught me. The forest is not our home. We are not its protectors. We are its prey. But I also understood this. Fear doesn't have to be a sacrifice. It can be a warning, and warnings can save lives. So I still walk these woods, not to patrol, not to convince myself they're safe, but to listen. If the pines whisper, I write down the direction. If a cave breathes, I mark it on the map. If footsteps match mine, I stay calm and learn. Because everything terrifying in this place, it learns too. And as long as I'm still here, it hasn't won. I still have a voice, a story, a memory the woods cannot swallow. And I'll keep telling it until the pines speak in my voice and the darkness knows my name.